criminal justice reform, also known as State Questions 780 and 781. You will decide on this next month. So we want to break it down for you, the law, break it down for you a little bit. 780 reclassifies drug possession to a low-level offense, taking it from a felony to a misdemeanor. 781 hitches onto 780. This would use money saved to beef up mental health and substance abuse treatment. Joined now by the author of the bill, Chris Steele, also former Speaker of the House, the Oklahoma Speaker of the House, and District 6 District Attorney Jason Hicks. Thank you both so much for being here to talk about this. We truly appreciate your time.
Thank you for having us.
Chris, I want to start with you since you are the author of this bill. Why did you decide to tackle this issue, and why did you decide to do it right now?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. Oklahoma has the highest incarceration rates of any state in the nation per capita. We incarcerate more female offenders than anybody. We have the second highest male incarceration rate, and just recently the U.S. Sentencing Commission released a report that also indicated that we incarcerate African Americans at the highest percentage per capita of any state in the nation. Spending for corrections has just ballooned. It's increased about 172% in the last 2 decades, and yet for all the people that we're incarcerating and for all the money that we're spending to incarcerate individuals, we're really not seeing any sort of positive return on investment by way of reducing crime and or increasing public safety. And it's because we are failing to address the root cause behind the criminogenic behavior, issues like addiction and mental illness. And so ultimately we've done our homework and been able to identify what policies have been successful in other states as far as sentencing reform is concerned, and effective use of resources to beef up and enhance treatment of mental health services in the community. And we've proposed State Question 780 and 781 ultimately to reduce the prison population and connect individuals who battle addiction and or mental illness with the services appropriate to meet their needs at the community level.
And DA Hicks is someone who prosecutes these alleged criminals, every day, if not every week. What concerns you the most about State Question 780 and 781? Why are you so vehemently opposed to this state question?
Well, I think it's a complex answer, and I think there's a lot of provisions in here that I'm concerned about. One is the fact that what this question will do, if it passes, is it will make the possession of any and all drugs, heroin, methamphetamine, PCP, LSD, the date rape drug, Rohypnol, it will make all of those a misdemeanor, not just for your first time, but for every single time somebody is brought through the system, it will be a misdemeanor. We don't have the opportunity to file that as a felony at any point. First time, 100th time, it doesn't matter. It will always be a misdemeanor. I'm also concerned because the state question will remove the provision that makes it a felony in the state of Oklahoma to have a controlled dangerous substance in your possession if you're within 1,000 feet of a school, within 1,000 feet of a park, within 1,000 feet of a rec center, or if you're in the presence of a minor child. So someone will be able to have up to 19 grams of methamphetamine in their possession and walk into a school, and that's going to be a misdemeanor. And to illustrate that 19 grams of methamphetamine, one can just think about 19 sugar packets. If you take the sugar out and put methamphetamine in it, that's going to be about the equivalent of 19 grams. So somebody could put those 19 sugar packets in their pocket, go walking into school, and it's still a misdemeanor in the state of Oklahoma. I'm concerned because we've had a lot of success with drug courts in the state of Oklahoma. I very strongly believe that this question will hurt drug courts in the state of Oklahoma, and I'm a firm believer in the drug courts and the successes that we've had. And what we do is we use the threat, if you will, of somebody going to prison for an extended period of time to get somebody in the drug court. And the drug court successes that we have, I don't want to take a step back from those positions and the gains that we've already made.
That is something that a lot of the opponents talk about, is taking away the bottom line. Are you taking away the bottom line? These people hitting rock bottom. Are you taking away the threat of a felony? Now, I'll just get a misdemeanor, I might as well continue my drug habit. Or maybe someone who has a tendency towards addiction. Are you worried about taking away rock bottom? If they're just going to get slapped with 10 misdemeanors, but not that threat of a felony?
Sure, not at all. The reality is this, that under these provisions, under State Question 780, drug manufacturing remains a felony conviction, drug distribution remains a felony conviction, drug possession with the intent to distribute remain a felony conviction. And so there's plenty of opportunity for district attorneys and courts to prosecute a person with a felony conviction who is possessing with the intent to distribute. Our reforms simply apply to an individual who is caught possessing low-level quantities of a controlled dangerous substance to feed a personal habit. And the reality is these reforms are based on research and based on evidence. And we've had in existence in Oklahoma what's called misdemeanor drug courts since 2008. And yet not a single misdemeanor drug court exists in the state because they've never been funded. And so if these reforms pass, it gives local jurisdictions, local counties and communities the opportunity to actually enhance and expand diversion options like drug court in the form of misdemeanor drug courts. And again, the research is very clear that swift, certain, and sure sanctions, the model contained in like a misdemeanor drug court program, are much more effective in modifying behavior for the person who battles addiction than extended periods of incarceration with absolutely no programming. Right now, we're simply warehousing individuals who battle addiction and or mental illness, and it's not resulting in a reduction in crime or an increase in public safety.
And if
Yeah,
I
go
could, the problem that you have with the misdemeanors is those misdemeanors are going to be 12 months, up to 12 months, and that's it. A drug court program, a successful drug court program, requires anywhere from 18 to 36 months for somebody to complete. And the people that we've seen come through the system who have a meth or a heroin problem, 12 months is just simply not enough time for us to be able to treat them and get them back into society without that continuing problem. So we need additional time to be able to address those issues as we move forward. Without that, and I'll give you an example. Just this past Friday, I was in the courtroom in Stevens County, and we had a lady there who pled guilty to a misdemeanor. She was given a deferred sentence, and the judge explained to her that she could come back in just a few months and have that expunged and have that conviction sealed. And she just looked at the judge and said, I don't need to know all that stuff. It doesn't matter to me. This is a misdemeanor. So we hear that in the courtroom on a regular basis. So that to be able to get somebody in a drug court, I really believe it has to be the threat of a felony, something that's more serious in order to move forward.
And talking about, I know we have a lot of parents who watch this newscast, and you talked about having it within a certain distance of a school. I know you're a parent as well. What is your answer to having, what did you say, 19 grams within a certain distance of a school? You referenced the sugar packets. That's going to concern a lot of parents out there. So what would you say to them when talking about this State Question 780 and 781?
Sure. Well, the safeguards remain in place. And so what District Attorney Hicks is speaking of is the offense of trafficking. 20 grams of a controlled dangerous substance in the state of Oklahoma equate to a trafficking offense. That does not change.
And that remains a felony.
Yes, that does not change under State Question 780. Neither does possession with intent to distribute. And just to sort of unpack the concern or the issue is this. Let's talk about who may be possessing drugs on a school ground. First of all, if it's a student that's experimenting, that individual needs to be in treatment. He needs some help, and he doesn't need, or she doesn't need, to be tagged as a felon for life because they are experimenting with drugs. We need to nip that in the bud. So that's one scenario. Another scenario might be a teacher or a school employee who is caught possessing. Well, that's against school policy. That individual would be fired immediately. And then the third scenario may be a parent. And I want to be very clear, child endangerment remains a felony conviction, and that's when a parent uses or possesses drugs in the presence of a child. So those safeguards remain in place, and the concerns are just unfounded about being able to bring drugs on school. Nobody's for that, and that wouldn't be allowed under 780 either.
I do want to get to the viewer questions in just one moment, but you touched on how you model this after different states who have had success. And one of those states I know you've told me is Texas, and they've also had a lot of financial benefits from doing this as well. If you could quickly touch on what you saw from Texas that you kind of modeled State Question 780 and 781 after the state of Texas.
Sure. So there are 10 states that have already moved to this exact model. Texas has a variation of these reforms. So they enacted their reforms, their sentencing reforms, in 2007, and ultimately what they determined, it was under the leadership of Governor Rick Perry. They said, wait a minute, we don't want to spend all of our state's money on incarceration. We would rather invest in things like education and economic development and healthcare and things of that nature. And so ultimately they reformed their sentencing guidelines to differentiate between the low-level offender who could be better served through treatment and supervision in the community versus the individual who poses a legitimate danger to society and needs to be incarcerated. So they enacted a variation of these exact reforms in 2007. They followed through by investing in treatment and mental health care at the community level. And in 9 years, the state of Texas has realized over $3 billion worth of savings. They've actually closed 3 state prisons in a 9-year period of time because they didn't have enough people to put in them. They've closed 14 juvenile detention centers, and crime in Texas is at a 30-year low, including violent crime. So what they've been able to do is address the root cause behind the behavior, and they've experienced tremendous success both from a financial aspect and from a public safety aspect, and there's no reason to believe that we wouldn't achieve the same sort of results here in Oklahoma.
Well, and as far as the state of Texas goes, what I've seen out of the state of Texas is I wouldn't necessarily say that it is similar to. I think State Question 780 is more similar and more akin to Proposition 47 in California. And what 780 will do is will give us some of the most liberal drug laws in the entire state of Oklahoma. Now, the state of Texas, when they reformed their laws and their system, they went in the state of Texas made a $240 million investment up front from appropriated dollars, which is not what we're doing in this particular case. We're trying to take money out of savings, and and it's going to be a calculation. That's State Question 781, and it's going to be a calculation that's supposedly made by a state agency. And if that state agency steps in and says there are no savings, then there absolutely not going to be any money that's going to be going back to the counties for treatment. And neither one of these questions mandate treatment for anybody. So offenders will still be able to walk into the courtroom and say, I would rather have my 12 months in the county jail as opposed to going into any treatment program.
We have a viewer question about that, so I want to get to some of these. Let's start with this viewer question here from Marlene. Former Speaker, this one's for you. The authors of these bills might have second thoughts if it was their property that was damaged or stolen by a repeat offender. Crime is crime, and mental illness is no excuse. Our healthcare system can't handle all of those who claim mental illness, so if we let them roam the streets with no punishment, I will be voting no on these bills. What would be your response to that?
So there is punishment involved, and each offense carries with it up to a year in county jail. But the reality is that in most situations that involve simple property crimes, simple theft, there's almost always an underlying cause that's dictating that behavior. It's either addiction or mental illness. And if somebody has stolen from me or anybody else in the state of Oklahoma, I think what would be best is if that person had the opportunity to actually pay restitution and pay that person back for whatever damage they may have caused. They can't do that if they're sitting in prison. So these reforms give them an opportunity to actually make the victim whole while getting the treatment they need to deal with the root cause that may be spurring the behavior, and ultimately that leads to better outcomes for everyone.
The next question is for the district attorney. This one's from Sean. So if you are not for this, what is your solution to resolve the problems for those unable to find work due to these drug charges? And we've talked about how a felony on your record is really a scarlet letter for life. There are several companies out there, several thousands of companies who won't hire somebody who is a felon for life. What's your answer? What's your solution?
Right. Well, and I think you've got to take a step back and look at the situation we're in right now. And I would tell you, and I can give you some examples of people in my district courts who've gone to the court on simple possession charges. We generally start off with a deferred sentence, which means if somebody will go get treatment and perform some community service and do some other things, that conviction is never entered. The records will be expunged and they actually go away, which is what a deferred sentence does. But we've seen time and time again people continue to fall back into what they were doing prior to, so that sometimes doesn't necessarily work. We recently in the state of Oklahoma are going to allow first-time offenders to go into the drug court program. I've been a firm believer in that and been an advocate for putting first and second-time offenders into the drug court programs in the state of Oklahoma, because then we deal with offenders who have drug problems right up front. We deal with them immediately and hopefully get to the situation and deal with those issues before they move forward. I also believe, as far as the overcrowding in the prison goes, something that I would point out in former Speaker Steele's Justice Reinvestment Initiative, in that report, it noted that the district attorneys in the state of Oklahoma, the courts in the state of Oklahoma, are doing a good job of removing those who would be seen as addicts, removing them from the system and actually put them into diversionary programs. So we're doing the things that we need to be doing now. I would suggest that maybe the state of Oklahoma needs to invest more money into mental health services and into drug courts across the state and allow us to get more people into those programs.
You're nodding your head, so you do agree.
That's exactly what 780 and 781 accomplish. It gives us the opportunity to make better use of our resources by making greater investments in mental health and substance abuse services throughout communities in Oklahoma. That's exactly what we...
Well, if I could, the problem with that is the money. We don't know if there's going to be any money there. We don't know if there's going to be any savings. State Question 781 and 780 will take effect in July of 2017 if they're passed. And there will not be a single calculation of savings until June of 2018. So there's going to be no money in the system from July 1st of 2017 for that first fiscal year. And then we're going to be relying upon the Office of Management and Enterprise Services to make a calculation to tell us whether there are actual savings in that system in the first place. So if they come out and they say there are no savings, then there will be no money for mental health treatment, there will be no money for drug treatment, and it will mandate upon the counties that they're the ones that are responsible for this.
So you're worried that it's going to fall on you and fall on the county jails and fall on the counties and not as much on the state if this does pass, is what you're concerned?
Absolutely. I believe,
okay.
I believe it's a mandate on the counties, and it's not a
less
funded
pressure
mandate.
on the state.
Correct.
Okay. Final thoughts from you?
Sure. So Governor Fallon...
Quickly, we are running out of time, I'm sorry.
Governor Fallon has a task force. It's called the Justice Reform Task Force, and they've produced research as recently as last week that indicated that 75% of people who were admitted into DOC custody last year were for nonviolent offenses. Of that 75%, 56% were for simple drug possession. Of the 56% that were for simple drug possession, 80% had 0 or 1 prior convictions. So individuals who battle addiction and or mental illness are absolutely going to prison in droves in the state of Oklahoma, and we have to chart a smarter approach to public safety by addressing addiction and mental health appropriately through treatment instead of incarceration.
And I'll let you have one more final word as well. Would you at least agree that there is an issue here? We are spending a ton of money on criminal justice right now, and on our prisons, and incarcerating people in a state that doesn't have a lot of money. We talk about the budget crisis all the time. We spend a lot more money per capita than most other states. So would you at least agree that there is a problem with our justice system right now?
I have not ever said there wasn't an issue with it.
Okay, so you agree
fact,
that, but you don't agree that State Question 780 and 781 is the solution?
I do not think that State Question 780 and 781 are the solution to the problem that we see today. There are several solutions. We could easily turn around. The parole board's recommendation for release rate is at 10% on nonviolent crimes today. So there is a way to relieve some of the pressure inside the prisons without going to the extent that we are now. I've seen the same charts that former Speaker Steele is referencing, and the most recent chart that I saw showed that 25% of the prison population is due to some type of a drug offense. Well, that includes your simple possessions, but it's also your manufacturing, your aggravated manufacturing, your trafficking, your possession with intent, and your distribution. So all of that information that's out there it can be a little bit misleading depending on the way that it's presented. I firmly believe that what this will do is will encourage further drug use. It's going to encourage further theft of property, and is not going to be a good thing for the state of Oklahoma. I saw an article just a couple of weeks ago from the Wall Street Journal that indicated that the states that have already done this are seeing their incarceration rates up 2 and 3 years after these types of reforms were imposed.
Very interesting comments from both sides of the aisle. I certainly appreciate the time, and because we live in a democracy, it'll certainly be up to the people of Oklahoma, the voters, come November. District Attorney Jason Hicks and former Speaker of the House and the Chairman for Oklahoma for Criminal Justice Reform, Chris Steele, thank you both for making it out here. And I just want to say I think you both have the same goals, but maybe different ways to approach it. Like you said, you both agree that we have a little bit of maybe a broken system that we're dealing with right now, and both agree that we have some work to do, but maybe different approaches to tackle the problem. But I appreciate the time and great discussion. I wish we had more time to talk about this, but it is now up to the Oklahoma voters, guys. I appreciate the time.